Somewhere in the darkness between a banana grove and a village road, a woman is standing perfectly still. She's beautiful. She's wearing white, and she smells of flowers. But in the folklore of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, those three things together are not a sign of beauty. They are a warning. There are three signs that the Pontianak is near. This is her story, one of the most deeply rooted and widely feared legends in all of Southeast Asia. The word Pontianak comes from the Malay phrase perempuan mati beranak, which translates as woman who died in childbirth. At its heart, the Pontianak is the ghost of a woman whose life was cut short at its most vulnerable and most sacred moment. She is not born evil. She is made that way by death, by loss, by the violent interruption of the act of bringing life into the world. The legend is most deeply rooted in the Malay-speaking world across Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and parts of the southern Philippines and southern Thailand. In Indonesia, she is known as the Kuntilanak. In some regions, she is called the Matianak or the Buentianak. The legend is so deeply embedded in the region's identity that an entire city was named after her. Pontianak, the capital city of West Kalimantan in what is now Indonesia, was founded in 1771 by a sultan named Syarif Abdurrahman Al-Qadri. According to local legend, the land on which the city was built was infested with Pontianak spirits. The ghosts haunted the swamps and jungles so aggressively that they attacked Al-Qadri and his soldiers on arrival. His solution was decisive. He ordered his men to fire cannons into the jungle, driving the spirits away with the force of iron and fire. He then built a mosque and a palace on the exact site where the spirits had gathered, a deliberate act of claiming sacred space through faith. To this day, the people of Pontianak fire bamboo cannons on Ramadan and on other holidays, a tradition that remembers the night the Sultan drove the spirits from the swamp. To understand the Pontianak, you have to understand the world in which she was born, a world where multiple belief systems existed in layers, one on top of another. Before Islam arrived in Southeast Asia, the region's peoples practiced animism, the belief that every living and non-living thing contains a spirit, and that the boundary between the material and spiritual world is thin and permeable. In animist belief, the death of a woman during childbirth was not simply a tragedy. It was a spiritual rupture, a soul torn from its body at the most powerful and liminal moment a human being can experience. That kind of death, violent, incomplete, unresolved, was understood to produce a spirit of exceptional power and exceptional rage. When Islam spread through the Malay world, it did not erase those older beliefs. It settled over them. The Pontianak sits at the intersection of both. She is talked about in terms of jinn and roh, Islamic spirits, but her roots are firmly in the older animist world. In appearance, the Pontianak is unfailingly beautiful. She represents herself as a young woman, pale-skinned, wearing a flowing white dress. Her hair is long, straight and black, and it hangs loose, obscuring her face. Her feet are bare, and she smells of frangipani. The scent of frangipani is the first sign, sweet, unmistakable, floral, and entirely wrong to encounter deep in a jungle at midnight. The scent changes, first flowers, then, if she is close enough, the unmistakable smell of decay beneath the sweetness. But by the time you smell the decay, according to the legend, it is already too late. When she draws near, her beauty drops away, her skin becomes corpse pale, her mouth splits into a wide, unnatural grin of sharp, dark teeth. Her eyes glow red, her fingers lengthen into claws. In many versions, she tears her victims open with those claws and feeds on their internal organs, especially the heart, liver, and stomach. One of the most distinctive and psychologically terrifying aspects of the Pontianak legend is the way her sound works, and the way it inverts everything the human brain expects. If her cry is loud, she is far away. If her cry is soft, barely a whisper, she is right beside you. In some versions of the legend, she also mimics the sound of a baby crying to draw women, midwives, and pregnant mothers out of their homes and into the dark. The scream itself is described as a high, shrill, hysterical laughter that turns into a wail, a sound that starts as something human and ends as something that is absolutely not. In villages where the legend is strong, people still say, if you hear a baby crying outside at night, check your own child first. If the sound is not coming from your house, do not go looking for it. During the daytime, the Pontianak does not roam. According to some of the oldest versions of the belief, she sleeps, hidden inside a banana tree. This is why generations of children in Malaysia and Indonesia were warned by their grandmothers, do not play near banana trees. Do not touch them after dark. Do not be alone near them. The connection between the Pontianak and the banana tree is rooted in the oldest animist beliefs of the region, in the understanding that spirits of the dead find refuge in growing things, and that the banana, with its rapid growth and connection to fertility, is a particularly powerful vessel. Some stories say that when the spirit becomes too active, the community can bind it inside a banana trunk and bury it face down in the ground, marking the spot so people know to avoid it. Others say that if you tie a red thread from a banana tree to the foot of your bed, you can bind the Pontianak to your will, though such stories usually end badly for the human who tries it. Across the folklore, one detail appears again and again, the detail that has fascinated anthropologists and mythologists most. The Pontianak, it is said, has a small hole at the nape of her neck. If a man can drive a nail into that hole, she is transformed. The monstrous spirit becomes a beautiful, gentle woman, and in some versions of the story, a loyal wife and companion. She can live as a human being for years, raising children, cooking, working, appearing to be perfectly ordinary as long as the nail remains in place. But if the nail is ever removed, she returns immediately, and she is no longer gentle. Some scholars interpret the nail as a metaphor, a symbol of the control and domestication of women's power and rage, and of what happens when that control is released. The idea that a man can tame a vengeful spirit and turn her into a submissive wife by literally pinning her down at the neck says a great deal about the culture that produced the story. The fear of the Pontianak was not only reactive, it shaped how communities prepared for and mourned the death of women in childbirth. According to tradition, to prevent a woman who died in childbirth from rising as a Pontianak, a Biden, a traditional midwife or elder would place glass beads in the deceased mouth. The beads would fill the mouth, preventing the ghost's screaming laughter from leaving the body. Without her scream, she could not call or hunt. Pins were also placed in specific joints of the body, the hands, feet, elbows, to restrict the ghost's ability to move freely if it did rise. In some accounts, an iron nail would be driven into the corpse's neck at the same spot where, In the legend, the Pontianak snail must go, a preventive version of the same act meant to hold the spirit down before it ever leaves the body. These rituals are grim, but they are also recognitions of something real. Childbirth in the pre-modern Malay world was genuinely dangerous. Women died in the act of giving life far too often. The Pontianak is one way the community gave shape to that fear. In many stories, the Pontianak preys predominantly on men. She appears as a beautiful woman alone on dark roads or beneath banana trees, waiting for a man to stop and offer help. Her victims are often described as men who were unfaithful, cruel, or took advantage of women, men who abandoned pregnant partners or who abused their wives. The legend functions as a kind of moral code, a supernatural punishment for male wrongdoing in a culture where women's suffering often went unnoticed or unpunished. She is not a random predator. She is selective. Her victims usually fit a pattern, men who, in the eyes of the story, deserve what they get. In this sense, the Pontianak is both a horror figure and a social warning, a ghost who enforces consequences when human justice has failed. In recent decades, scholars and writers, particularly feminist scholars in Malaysia and Indonesia, have begun reading the Pontianak very differently. The Pontianak, they argue, is not simply a monster to be feared. She is a monument to female suffering, a ghost who embodies danger of childbirth, the grief of a lost child, and the rage of a woman whose death was never properly mourned. She rips the eyes out of men who look at her the wrong way. She disembowels men who treat women as disposable. She is not just a horror story. She's a story about what happens when a woman's pain is ignored. Vice journalist Ko Yu has called her Southeast Asia's vengeful man-eating spirit and a feminist icon, a figure who has become a vessel for articulating anger at the patriarchal structures the legend was born inside. In this reading, the Pontianak is grief that refused to stay buried. She's the scream that could not be pinned down with beads in the mouth. She's the maternal death that did not quietly disappear into the ground. The Pontianak moved from village belief to mass culture in a single night, the 27th of April, 1957. At the stroke of midnight, a film simply called Pontianak premiered at the Cathay Cinema in Singapore, the first cinematic depiction of the creature ever made. It was directed by B.N. Rao and starred Maria Manado, whose on-screen transformation from beautiful kampong girl to horrifying Pontianak stunned audiences who had grown up hearing the legend only in words. The film was scheduled for a short run. It stayed in cinemas for months. It was a box office phenomenon, and it effectively launched the horror genre in Singapore and Malaysia's film industries. It spawned two sequels, Dendam Pontianak and Sumpah Pontianak, and turned Maria Manado into a horror icon. When people of that generation heard the word Pontianak, they pictured her face. The original 1957 film is now considered lost. No complete print is known to survive. It exists today only in production stills, reviews, and the memories of those who saw it. In a way, that feels appropriate. A ghost story that helped found an entire film industry now exists as a ghost of a film, a missing reel everyone still talks about. Today, the Pontianak remains one of the most recognized supernatural figures in Southeast Asia, appearing in films, novels, television dramas, comics, and video games across Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. She has moved from the banana grove to the apartment block, from the kampong road to the hospital corridor, but she has not changed. The settings are new, the fear she embodies are not. Modern Malaysian and Indonesian horror often reimagines her in urban spaces, high-rise flats, highways, shopping malls, but she's still the same ghost, a woman who died in childbirth, who is angry and refuses to be forgotten. She's the fear of dying in the act of giving life, the fear of grief that goes unwitnessed, the rage of a woman whose death was unmourned. The Pontianak is a ghost born at the boundary of life and death. She is the oldest fear of the oldest people of these islands, dressed in white, waiting in the dark between the trees. She is not simply a monster. She is a memory of every woman whose death went unmourned, of every child who never drew breath, of every grief the world decided not to carry. She is still out there in the spaces between the trees where the light does not reach, beautiful, still, and smelling of flowers.